1979 was also the year of the Egyptian-Israeli peace treaty. Anwar Sadat, the president of Egypt, and Menachem Begin, the prime minister of Israel, had been meeting prior to this time, and in 1978 convened at Camp David with President Jimmy Carter in order to craft the treaty. The treaty was signed on March 26, 1979. To a certain extent, this represented the victory of Anwar Sadat's program of pragmatism, as opposed to supporting the Muslim Brotherhood with its Islamist approach, or what today we would call Islamist approach, and the policies of Gamal Abdel Nasser, who had died in 1970, who emphasized alliances with the third world and playing the United States and the Soviet Union off against each other, and centralizing power in his own person and promoting the army and the military as the government of Egypt. Sadat tried to have a pragmatic approach and thought that having peace with Israel would set Egyptian business back on an even course and create an economic boom in Egypt. Also in March, the Eurovision was held, and the Hallelujah La'olam won. The Hallelujah La'olam, I have a link over there to YouTube. And this was a very simple, wonderful song. I'm going to try to play it for you in a moment, written by Kobi Efrat. Hallelujah forever. Every day is a great day. Very typical of the Eurovision. Symbolically, however, this represented a time in which the Israeli Eurovision entry had won 2 times in a row, 1978 and 1979. What a heady victory, you might say, for the Israelis. I'll just play a little bit of the YouTube. I'm going to skip ahead towards the end. You can see that in those days, the style of the Eurovision, which was probably the most broadly watched musical program in the world, more than the Oscars even say. The musical style was pretty simple and straightforward. On the bottom, I have a picture of the president of Egypt, the president of the United States, and the prime minister of Israel on the right-hand side, and of myself in Beersheba near a large document that was signed by Begin and Sadat when they came to visit the Well of Abraham in that city. The runner-up, by the way, that year was called Nolati L'Shalom, I Was Born by Peace, and the YouTube link is there. This is not the performance that was the runner-up in the Israeli pre-Eurovision. It is a performance by the composer Hitman, Uzi Hitman. 1979 Iraq was also a red letter year. Saddam Hussein, the leader of the Ba'ath Party of Iraq, became the 5th president of Iraq in July of 1979. Now, Saddam was one of the people who organized the coup which brought him to power in 1968 and had been the actual power in Iraq for some time previously. He probably had orchestrated the killings of Jews and Christians and a few Muslims, the hangings in the downtown square in Baghdad in 1969 already. But in 1979, he became the official fifth president of Iraq. We talked about Zulfikar Ali Bhutto being toppled by Zia al-Haq in 1977. He was executed in 1979, and this, you might say, put the end of the era together with the death of Abu Ala al-Maududi, who's shown in the lower right-hand side, was the author of Introduction to the Quran, a popular Quranic commentary. He may have been one of the first people to have used the term Islamic Revolution in the 1940s, and in many ways was the theoretician behind the idea that there should be a Muslim state, a state that was largely Muslim in South Asia, in the British Indian Empire, rather than having the entire area be a single country as it had been under the British. His idea was that it would have a top-down reform of the morals, the ethical actions, having piety. It would not be a primarily social and economic reformist approach. And it would go slowly and try to change the tenor of society from the top down by teaching, by instruction, and by leadership, rather than a surge, a revolution coming from the bottom up. Nevertheless, his idea was Islam could have a universal state, a state in which there were Jews and there were Christians and presumably Hindus who would pay the jizya, a poll tax that allowed them to live there, a state in which a recognized Islamic authority would be symbolically and in a sense practically also the leader of the society. I don't know off the top of my head whether Maududi had the idea that this would be a caliph, but it was very similar to some of the caliphal ideas that had been approached. And we see that some of his followers would espouse this idea in the 1970s as a universalist idea. In New York City and Philadelphia, there were, well, actually in the United States, the AAR, the American Academy of Religion, had an Islamic section for a number of years in the 1970s, in which one of the leaders espoused this idea as a way to have a trialogue of the three faiths. But the trialogue ultimately, in his mind and his writings at least, should lead to the idea of a universal realm of peace, but one ruled by a caliph. The seizure of the embassy on November 4th, 1979, really put, you might say, a capstone on the Iranian Revolution of 1979 and making it clear that students who were anti-American, students who were anti-Israel, students who were pro-Islam would be motivated by Khomeini in order to seize the embassy. They had tried a couple of times to do it. And it was quite clear that Khomeini and the Iranian Islamic Revolution was totally in control. As many of you are aware, the seizure of the embassy lasted for 440 days, ending on the day that Ronald Reagan was inaugurated as President of the United States, January 20th, 1981. Some of you may have seen the feature film Argo, which is based on the memoir of one of the CIA agents who was involved in freeing 6 Americans who were held temporarily in the Canadian embassy.